So, in this holiday season of Christmas, of giving, of generosity, of light and love, I would like to talk to you about selfishness. I think selfishness got a bad rap. And it probably has a lot to do with my particular definition. Here's my definition of selfishness. Self-care done badly. Right? Little kids all the time are said, don't be selfish, don't be selfish, don't be like that, don't be like that. So how can they ever, in our society, do we teach self-care? All we do is shut down people who are being selfish, and that they're just doing it badly. Think about this. Maybe you were a parent who had a kid who in elementary school decided to be in the elementary school orchestra or band. And they brought home their instrument for the first time and practiced for hours and hours. And you sat there letting them, because you love your kid, through the excruciatingness of them learning. And then one day, it actually sounded like music. And they got better. Imagine, though, if you had gone into the room and said, no, don't be like this. This doesn't work. This is too painful for me. Don't be like this. How could they have ever gotten better at it? And that's what we're dealing with all the time. Is a society that has no idea, because we don't teach it, to kids in particular, how to take care, how to develop self-care. Because they're just being selfish. Right? And so what happens to people like ourselves when we are shut down trying to figure out how to do self-care is we become people pleasers. Do we have any of those in the room? Yeah. Or we become caregivers that give and give and give until they burn themselves out. Do we have any of those in the room? Or my particular way of doing it, you become a rebel. And you go, screw all of you. Maybe there are more than just me here that went that route. And so when I was a kid, I was called selfish all the time. I looked at my parents and they seemed to be doing the same stuff I was doing. So I just thought, nobody's going to take care of me, so I better just take care of myself. So they could say that I'm selfish all they want. I'm going to take care of myself. But here's the thing about it. None of those routes are any better towards actually learning self-care. I didn't learn self-care. I just learned how to be a rebel. If you became a people pleaser, you didn't learn self-care, you became a people pleaser. If you became a caregiver, you didn't learn self-care, you learned how to care about others. And in this way, we get stressed out, anxious, all these things that we feel that separate us from people come out of not learning self-care. And so, when at a time I was so selfish that by the time I was 16, called my dad one day, I was in a real fix, for help, and he said to me, I don't worry about you. I worry about the people you come in contact with. And he hung up on me. Now, this same man, well, I'll get to that part in a second. At 18, I had become so antisocial that I'm sitting with a buddy of mine and saying, if I can't figure out how to get along with you, I give up on civilization completely and I'm going to be a hermit in the woods. I mean, I was done trying to get along with people. Just done. Then I started doing a bunch of spiritual and new thought ideas and rituals. Started gaining the thought that, self-care might be something that is learnable. Till one day, this same man who at 16 told me how he wasn't worried about me, but the people I came in contact with when my sister wanted to hire me for doing some computer programming for her. My dad spoke up and said, "You could never have somebody better watching your back." That's quite a turnaround. I was shocked when he said it. But that's what happens when we start looking at self-care. Now, unconsciously, I was doing all these things to take care of myself because it turns out that a big part of self-care is getting along with society, getting along with others. That's actually part of self-care. Is that this thing doing it? Let's see if I can move that a little bit, see if that helps. So I wound up in a cabin in the woods. I've told you about that before. I was in there for 2 years. I learned a tremendous amount of lessons, and I'm going to share some of those with you today. I've shared some before. This particular lesson has to do with self-care because I learned some things about self-care in that cabin in the woods that I want to share with you so you don't have to do 2 years in a cabin in the woods. Here's the first one. Selflessness is not a spiritual quality. Selflessness is not a spiritual quality. It is a man-made quality by people who wanted to control other people and thought if we can convince them to be selfless, then they'll serve us better. Self-care is actually a spiritual quality. It has been my spiritual journey. When I was in that cabin in the woods, I think we figured out that was 13 years ago, I started to recognize all the ways in which self-care played into having a joy-filled life. How much it mattered that I was focused on self-care to create all the other things that started to work out in my life. I have to tell you that my focus on self-care is almost 100% of the time, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more. So bear with me on this because I'm going to walk you through how all this works, or at least the way I see it. And since I'm the guy you hired to be up here, I'm just going to tell you how I see it. One of the first things I saw, one thing I've been chasing my whole life came from a saying that went something like this. Oh, I skipped a piece. I'm going to jump back a little bit. About selflessness. I want to say one more thing about it before I move on to the next thing. If you're in an airline, they say to you, put on your own mask first. Because if you don't, you can't help anybody else. That's not selfless. That's self-care that then, because you've done self-care, leads to your ability to be of service. It doesn't have to be a lack of oxygen that lets you get to a place where you can be more service to others because of the self-care you've given to yourself. That's really important to recognize that to be of any good to anybody else, you first have to have the self-care in place. But even more than that, and I will get to this, it goes even deeper than that. The second thing that I was just about to say came from a saying that goes something like this. If you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. I have been chasing that my whole life. That's why I've had over 90 jobs. I kept looking for the job that didn't feel like work. I found one. This is the second time I found work, a job that didn't feel like work. Very early in my life, I worked for Club Med. I was their entertainment director at Paradise Island. That didn't feel like work either. But I didn't want to spend the rest of my life doing that. But at least now I had a mental equivalent, right? We talk about mental equivalents here. I know what it feels like to have a job that doesn't feel like work. So I go through these 90 jobs. Now, here's the thing about it. I'm not recommending that you need to go through 90 jobs to find the job that feels like love what you do and you'll never work a day in your life. If I knew now, then I wouldn't have had to go through 90 jobs. I would have understood that being responsible for the creation of my life, being responsible for everything that occurs in my life is self-care. Because I'm taking care of myself when I take responsibility and power for what I'm creating. Right? That's self-care. When I take on that what I embody manifests, that what shows up in my life is absolutely related to what's going on in here, that's self-care. So the deeper I get into that, the deeper I get to feel my joy-filled life. I get to experience it. The deeper I understand, the deeper I experience, the deeper I go through each day of what I embody manifests. So I spend a lot of time looking at what showed up, because that's the best way for me to know what I've embodied, is by what shows up. This is what happened in the cabin in the woods. I started looking at all this stuff and started going, okay, I've been taking these classes for years now, but now it's time to really put it to work. To really take that responsibility. I created 3 divorces. I did that. You know, I could look and say, well, they did this, they did that, blah, 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 blah. And maybe you do that sometimes. I mean, I do that sometimes still. But then I laugh at myself. Laughing at myself, self-care. The more you can laugh at yourself, the more you enjoy yourself. I enjoy myself a lot. I know I've told you that before, but it's part of self-care, is actually not taking yourself so seriously. Leaning into what's uncomfortable is actually self-care. Think about it. If you lean into what's uncomfortable, and you do that regularly, all of a sudden what's uncomfortable begins to become comfortable. As it becomes more comfortable, if you increase your life in terms of what's comfortable, well, then it's easier to feel joy-filled, isn't it? Right? So leaning into what's uncomfortable is a great way to take care of yourself, because it increases the part of your life that's comfortable. Following our soul's intention. I have found that to be a fantastic way of self-care. Following that voice that always knows, has no doubt, has a certainty in my life being joy-filled, in my life working out. That has been the greatest self-care tool I have ever found. Is so willing to follow that voice through a simple question of what is mine to do now? And it either is or it isn't. And I don't have to explain myself. I don't have to say why, because there is no why, because sometimes I don't even know why. Doing what my wife tells me to do, self-care. If you look at anything that we teach here as a spiritual principle, The best reason to do it, the best reason to practice it, the best reason to be in it is self-care. Your life gets better. What's better than that? Right? What better sense of self-care than your life gets better? That's the beauty of all this. And so I am the most selfish person I know because I spend most moments of most days concentrating on myself and what is self-care. And then out of that, doing a talk, coming up here and doing talks for you. I work these talks and I work them all week long to make sure when I get up here, what I'm saying to you matters, can actually be useful for you. But in fact, it's self-care. I don't want to look like an idiot. So I work this stuff. When you give, and here's the thing about giving that I've learned, right? Have you ever had the experience of a little kid you just gave a gift to, and they open up the gift and their eyes light up because it's exactly what they wanted? And then they come over and they throw their arms around you. Is there any better feeling in the world than that? Well, as far as I'm concerned, I want that every day. I don't want to just wait till I do that with a little kid. Because my little kid's 31 now. And so, feeling that, knowing that quality in here, and then making sure I'm giving in a way that allows for me to feel that. That's self-care, right? And that's the beauty of giving. I have learned there's no greater self-care than giving what I love to do and giving to those I love. Love is an incredible self-care feeling that we get to have. And so that's why I spend all my time in self-care. All of it, every day. Thinking about, is what I'm doing mine to do? Is this serving me? Because if it's not going to serve you. It's not going to serve anybody. That's why I don't get up here and talk about things that don't matter to me. Right? People come to me sometimes, why don't you talk about this? Why don't you talk about this? Well, I got to talk about what feels right here because that's me being self-care with myself. And I notice that the feedback I get is that because I talk from my experience, that works. Because I talk from my heart, that works. If you live from your heart, that works. And so for me, one of the things that I noticed was, because I've been told that I have a lot of courage because of the way I've lived. And I want you to know that it actually went, from my point of view, in terms of what was happening for me, didn't feel like courage. It felt like, what else was I going to do? And so that's what I realized in the cabin. And that's why what I want to bring to you is you have a choice on what you want to settle for. But I want you to know that everything I went through, every struggle, every heartache, every firing, every falling apart and coming back together was absolutely worth it to live the life I'm living now. My wife and I, we pinch ourselves. We go, this is amazing to live at this high a level, to live in such joy and energy, to can't wait to what you do next. That's what I want for each and every one of you, to feel like you can't wait to what happens next, because life's so darn amazing. But it takes making this kind of stand. And in this kind of season, it's perfect. What greater gift than to give yourself the gift of self-care? What greater gift than allow somebody else the gift of self-care? This is not a balancing act. This is not about balancing self-care with giving. I don't do anything outside my self-care. Nothing. Because I have found if I stay within the bounds of what is my self-care, I am of the greatest service to you. And that's what I offer to you today. Stand for your self-care. Learn what it is for you. Because it feels so darn good. You know? I could talk about the power and the presence and how things shift and show up and the success I'm having because of it all. But that isn't near as important to me as just how good it feels. How good my life feels. And that's what I want for each and every one of you. To have a life that feels this good or better. Heck, I'm really up for you guys having one that even feels better. Tonight, we're going to have an experience of self-care. What I've put together is a ritual where you will get to experience your own self-care inside giving and receiving. That's, so you can actually feel what it's like, what I'm talking about. That's what I'm going for tonight, is for you to feel what it feels like to be inside your self-care as you give and receive. You don't have to bring anything but yourself. We got everything here for you. So you don't have to bring a gift or anything. Just show up. It will be powerful. Because self-care is the thing. Loving yourself that deeply is what allows you to bring your gift to the world in the biggest and most positive way. I'm telling you, this is what it's done for me. And I know that it can do it for you. I love you. Thank you.